We celebrate the champions, the flawless swings, and the perfect trajectories that vanish into the back of the cup. But the true theatre of sport, the moment that grips the heart and refuses to release, is not found in victory. It is found in the moment of absolute, devastating vulnerability. Consider this image frozen in time against the brutal, windswept backdrop of Carnoustie, a seasoned professional standing exposed, stripped of his shoes and socks, ankle-deep in the cold, murky water of the Barry Burn. In a sport defined by tailored elegance and reserved decorum, why would a man choose this watery grave for his attire? This was not the joy of triumph. This was the physical manifestation of sporting agony. The year was 1999. The prize was the coveted Claret Jug, and the man in the stream was Jean van de Velde. For 3.5 days, he had mastered the ancient links, navigating the unforgiving gorse and the glass-like greens. Yet, on the 72nd hole, the final bastion of the course, he delivered what can only be described as the ultimate epic golf failure. How does a 3-stroke lead, a margin reserved for processions, not contests, dissolve into a spectacle of miscalculation and desperation? This was more than just dropping a shot. It was the catastrophic evaporation of a lifetime's work. We are not merely discussing a lost golf dream. We are dissecting the final 5 minutes where Van de Velde, standing right there, Van de Velde in socks, became the eternal, heart-wrenching symbol of the near miss. That defining moment of the Barry Burn drama is etched into the very fabric of golf history, a cruel masterpiece of self-destruction. Before we dive into the anatomy of this spectacular collapse and the true scale of the emotional cost, I must ask, when you close your eyes and think of the 1999 Open Championship, what single emotion dominates that memory? Share your thoughts below. The 18th hole at Carnoustie, often dubbed home, is perhaps the most deceptive finishing hole in major championship golf. It is a par 5 that invites aggression, yet punishes hubris with the sternest discipline. For 3.5 days, Jean van de Velde had walked the tightrope of links golf with the confidence of a seasoned veteran. But standing on the final tee box with the Claret Jug seemingly within reach, the architecture of the moment and the architecture of the course began to conspire against him. The initial error was tactical, a decision that haunts the analysis of every golf historian: the driver. With a 3-shot lead, prudence dictated an iron, ensuring placement short of the treacherous Barry Burn, which snakes across the fairway not once, but twice. Instead, he unleashed the big stick, an act perhaps fueled by the desire to end the ordeal quickly, or perhaps by a sudden, paralyzing fear that only aggressive action could quell. The ball sailed right, bounding off the grandstands and settling into the deep, unforgiving rough, far from the manicured short grass where professionals prefer to operate. This was a warning shot fired across the bow, yet the ship remained stubbornly on its catastrophic course. The subsequent recovery attempt, a misguided swipe from the deep grass, sent the ball flying into the unforgiving territory of the spectator grandstands before it caromed violently backward. This trajectory, unpredictable and cruel, finally delivered the orb into the very place Carnoustie reserves for the broken dreams of golfers, the Barry Burn. The ensuing scene transcended sport and became pure theatre, a visual metaphor for the human condition battling overwhelming odds. The Frenchman, facing the water hazard, did not immediately take the penalty drop. Instead, he began a slow, deliberate disrobing. Shoes came off, socks were rolled neatly and tucked into his pocket, trousers were rolled up to the knee. Here was a man, moments away from securing one of the most prestigious titles in the world, reduced to a figure of Sisyphean desperation, standing ankle-deep in the cold, murky water. This image, Van de Velde half-naked, contemplating his next move in the shadow of the scoreboard, is not merely the picture of a mistake, it is the quintessential portrait of psychological choking under pressure. In high-stakes environments, the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and reasoned decision-making, can become overloaded. The athlete reverts to instinct, often choosing the most complex or emotionally satisfying solution rather than the logically sound one. For Van de Velde, the instinct was to save the ball, to physically retrieve the dream that had sunk, rather than accept the penalty and reset. He stood there, a solitary figure against the vast, unforgiving Scottish sky, assessing the lie. The water was shallow, but the bottom was muddy, littered with debris. The risk of splashing the ball out and having it remain in the hazard, or sending it flying into another unplayable spot was astronomical. The commentary box fell into a hushed reverence. The crowd, which had been buzzing with anticipation, now watched in stunned silence, witnessing the slow-motion collapse of a legend in waiting. And there is one more detail you might not imagine about this iconic moment. The Barry Burn, though small, is tidal. The water level fluctuates, and on that Sunday afternoon, the tide was coming in subtly, making the hazard slightly deeper, and the ground beneath his feet slightly softer than it might have been an hour earlier. It was a final, almost poetic insult delivered by nature itself. Had he arrived 5 minutes later, the burn might have been too high to wade through safely, forcing an immediate pragmatic drop. Wisely, though agonizingly late, Van der Velde stepped out of the water, took the penalty drop and played his 6th shot onto the green. He would eventually record a quadruple-bogey 7, squandering his 3-shot lead and forcing a playoff he would ultimately lose to Paul Lawrie. The image endures not because of the score, but because it perfectly encapsulates the brutal honesty of the gentleman's game. Golf offers no clock to run out, no teammate to pass the burden to. It demands that the player stand alone, take the consequence, and continue the march. Van der Velde's walk out of the Barry Burn was the walk of a man who had faced the most dramatic failure of nerve in the game's history, yet still retained the dignity to finish the hole. It was, in its own heartbreaking way, a profound victory of character over calamity. For those who bore witness, the sight of the Frenchman in his socks, wading through the water that claimed his destiny, remains the definitive memory of the 128th Open Championship. For more stories that remind us that golf is often less about perfection and more about perseverance, consider joining us again. We will see you on the next tee. The theatre of professional golf often demands a stoic facade, a mask of impenetrable focus designed to shield the athlete from the crushing weight of expectation. But occasionally, the pressure becomes so immense, so visible, that the mask cracks, revealing the raw, vulnerable humanity beneath. Such was the scene at Carnoustie's 18th in the summer of 1999. The grand, sweeping narrative of Jean van der Velde's unexpected dominance was not concluded with a triumphant handshake, but rather with a visual surrender to the elements, a photograph that has since become the defining image of modern competitive anxiety. The 18th at Carnoustie, appropriately named home, offers no comfort. It is guarded by the serpentine flow of the Barry Burn, a stream that meanders with cruel precision, cutting across the fairway not once, but twice, before hugging the final green. Van der Velde, needing only a pedestrian 6 to lift the Claret Jug, approached this hole with what appeared to be the confidence of a champion. Yet destiny, or perhaps the psychological gravity of the moment, had other plans. The drive was errant. The second shot, a decision born perhaps of haste rather than strategy, found the unyielding steel of the grandstand scaffolding, resulting in a disastrous bounce back across the fairway. Now, standing over his 3rd shot, the Frenchman's meticulous architecture of the previous 71 holes began to rapidly disintegrate. He pulled a wedge, intending to pitch safely short of the burn, or perhaps carry it entirely. The result was a thin, panicked miss-hit that skittered low, finding the cold, dark water of the Barry Burn. The silence that fell over Carnoustie was not one of shock, but of profound collective disbelief. It was the silence reserved for witnessing a public tragedy. What followed was the visual masterstroke of the entire championship. Rather than accepting the penalty drop immediately, a move that would have saved him precious strokes, Van der Velde paused. He removed his cap, then his shoes, then his socks, rolling up his trousers with the fastidious care of a man preparing for a casual paddle on a summer beach, utterly divorced from the magnitude of the moment. He waded into the murky water, his white feet stark against the dark sediment, his reflections slightly distorted by the current. This single iconic image, a man standing in ankle-deep water, the grandstands looming behind him, clutching a wedge, looking down at a golf ball half submerged in the Scottish stream, was not about golf. It was an instant, raw depiction of hope drowned by reality. Psychologically, this act of wading in was a final, desperate attempt to reclaim control over a situation that had spiraled far beyond his reach. He was searching for a miracle where statistical probability offered none. The temperature of the water, a detail often overlooked, would have been brutally cold, a sensory shock compounding the mental anguish. And there is one more detail you might not imagine. His caddy, Christophe Schmidt, stood on the bank, utterly aghast, desperately imploring him to take the penalty drop. Schmidt, understanding the rules and the clock, knew the cost of vanity. But Van der Velde was operating on a different plane, driven by the irrational need to play the ball as it lay, a final futile gesture of defiance against the inevitable. It was only after several agonizing minutes, realizing the futility and the risk of splashing water onto his face and club, a move that could have resulted in further penalties, that he wisely chose the unplayable lie. The resulting triple-bogey 7 forced a playoff, which he would subsequently lose to the understated brilliance of Paul Lawrie. Yet the scoreboard is a fleeting measure. Van der Velde's enduring legacy is not the victory he lost, but the profound human moment he shared. He stripped away the veneer of the professional athlete and showed us what defeat truly looks like: quiet, personal, and utterly exposed. The world remembers the man in the burn, not the winner on the podium. It was a moment of grace under fire, even if that fire had completely consumed his chances. It is a testament to the enduring drama of the Open that sometimes the most memorable performance is not the winning score, but the valiant yet flawed effort of the defeated. For more stories that capture the fragile nature of victory and the resilience of the human spirit in this gentleman's game, consider joining us. We shall see you on the next tee. The Open Championship at Carnoustie is a unique theatre, unforgiving and utterly honest. It strips away the pretense of modern golf, replacing it with a stark confrontation between man and the links. The year 1999 offered a masterclass in this dramatic tension, culminating not in a triumphant roar but in a silent, agonizing surrender to nature. Jean van der Velde, a talented Frenchman who had tamed the beast for 71 holes, stood on the 18th tee box, his destiny clutched firmly in his hand. He required nothing more than a conservative professional 6, a double bogey, to secure the Claret Jug. The score was a formality. What followed, however, was a profound lesson in the psychological weight of expectation. The crucial decision was the driver, an unnecessary weapon for a hole that demands caution. The resulting blast sailed far right, flirting with the unforgiving grandstands near the 17th green, settling deep into the dense knee-high rough. From there, the careful architecture of victory began its immediate accelerated collapse. The second shot, a hopeful, perhaps desperate attempt to reach the green, ricocheted wildly off the railing of the spectators' enclosure, launching the ball back across the fairway and into another patch of thick, treacherous fescue. It was the third stroke, however, that delivered the fatal blow. Hacked out of the rough, the ball sailed weakly, finding the most infamous water hazard in golf, the winding, muddy serpentine known as the Barry Burn. The trophy, metaphorically and literally, was now swimming. But the true drama, the moment etched indelibly into the visual history of the gentleman's game, was yet to come. Imagine the scene. The grandstands overflowed with thousands of stunned spectators. Millions watched globally, their collective breath held hostage by one man's unraveling. Van der Velde approached the edge of the burn, the water shallow but dark, representing the abyss of his fading dream. He did not immediately play the ball. Instead, in a decision that spoke volumes about his internal struggle, a battle between the demands of the rules and the raw human need for dignity, he began to undress. First the visor came off, then the shoes. The crisp white socks were carefully peeled away, revealing the pale vulnerability of his feet. He rolled up his trousers, exposing his ankles to the frigid Scottish waters. This was not merely a practical choice to keep his footwear dry. This was performance art, born of desperation. He was symbolically shedding the armor of the professional golfer, preparing to wade into the cold, hard reality of his failure. It was the visual equivalent of the ancient Greek tragedy, where the hero, having flown too close to the sun, must now walk through the shadows. The image captured by the cameras, a millionaire athlete stripped to his socks contemplating a muddy stream, became instantly iconic, a universal symbol of catastrophic professional misjudgment. And there is one more detail you cannot imagine about that moment of contemplation in the Barry Burn. While many assumed Van der Velde was evaluating the feasibility of playing the ball from the shallow water, a highly risky move, the primary concern, according to the man himself later, was the potential for the muddy bottom of the burn to permanently stain and ruin his expensive custom-made golf shoes. In the middle of losing the most coveted prize in golf, a small, almost comical moment of human pragmatism emerged: the concern for the footwear. It underscores the surreal nature of pressure. Sometimes the brain focuses on the mundane to avoid confronting the monumental. After what felt like an eternity, a full 2 minutes of deliberation in the water, sanity returned, perhaps prompted by the counsel of his caddy. He wisely chose to take the penalty drop, resigning himself to the triple-bogey 7, forcing a playoff that he would ultimately lose to Paul Lawrie. Van de Velde did not win the Claret Jug that day, but through his agonizing sock-clad foray into the Barry Burn, he secured a different kind of immortality. He provided the ultimate visual evidence that even the greatest margins can be erased by the slightest error in judgment, and that the game of golf, particularly on the ancient links, reserves its harshest lessons for those who mistake confidence for certainty. It was a moment of profound, captivating vulnerability, proving that even in defeat, a man can achieve legendary status. For more stories that capture the brutal beauty and enduring traditions of this gentleman's game, consider subscribing to our chronicles. We shall see you on the next tee. We speak often of the architecture of a golf course, but less often of the architecture of human collapse. Carnoustie's 18th hole is a masterpiece of both. The air was undeniably historic, heavy with the expectation of a continental coronation. Jean van de Velde needed only a double bogey 6 to claim the Claret Jug, a simple, pedestrian 6. Yet, the pressure exerted by the proximity of certain greatness is often far more debilitating than the pressure of necessity. It encourages the catastrophic, unnecessary gamble. Psychologists who study performance under duress often describe the phenomenon known as choking, a shift from automated, subconscious skill execution to conscious, over-analyzed movement. Van de Velde, the cool, composed Frenchman for 3.5 days, stood on the final tee and chose the driver, a decision that defied both logic and the overwhelming mathematical advantage he held. The result was swift and brutal. The ball sailed right, ricocheted sharply off the grandstand railing, and settled deep into the rough on the opposite side of the Barry Burn. From there, a layup short of the water was the only viable option. But the mind, already reeling from the initial error, often compounds the mistake in a desperate effort to correct the narrative instantaneously. He pulled the iron for his second shot. The resulting strike, weak and erratic, found the deep, unforgiving sand trap, forcing a difficult stance above the hazard. Still, the victory was salvageable. A chip out, a pitch on, 2 putts, a 7 perhaps, and a playoff would still beckon. But fate, or perhaps the sheer stubbornness of the Carnoustie gods, demanded a higher price. Van de Velde's third shot, a tentative attempt to find the green, sailed long and heavy. It struck the stone wall protecting the bank and plunged straight into the murky, slow-moving water of the Barry Burn. This is where the moment transcends merely a golf mistake and becomes an enduring visual parable. There is a precise point in the downfall of a hero where dignity is momentarily discarded in favor of raw, desperate effort. Having witnessed the ball settle in the water, technically playable, but entirely submerged, Jean van de Velde began to disrobe. He took off his shoes. He peeled away his socks. He rolled his crisp white trousers high above his knees. He was no longer a professional golfer competing for a major title. He was a man wading, literally and metaphorically, through the icy water of his own shattered expectation. The image, captured by 1,000 cameras, a solitary figure, pale legs exposed, standing midstream in the frigid Scottish creek, is less a sports photograph and more a classical portrait of vulnerability. It is the visual equivalent of Icarus falling, not from the heavens but into the muddy water of a local tributary. It is the moment where the impenetrable facade of the professional athlete dissolves, replaced by the naked humanity of defeat. The sheer theatricality of the scene forced a pause in the drama. He contemplated playing the submerged ball, a decision that would have been foolhardy at best, physically dangerous at worst. The rules official John Grant stood nearby, a silent, disapproving observer. The crowd held its breath, suspended between morbid fascination and deep empathy. Ultimately, reason prevailed. Van de Velde took the penalty drop, pitched onto the green and completed the hole with a disastrous triple-bogey 7. The 3-shot lead had vanished in the space of 20 agonizing minutes. He would lose the subsequent playoff to Paul Lawrie. The story of the 1999 Open is rarely told through the lens of Lawrie's remarkable comeback, but rather through the eternal memory of the man standing in the Barry Burn. It remains etched into the lore of the Open, not as a celebration of victory, but as a profound meditation on the razor's edge between triumph and catastrophe. It serves as a permanent, chilling reminder that in the gentleman's game the only certainty is uncertainty, and the cost of hubris is always paid in full. If moments like these, where human drama meets the immutable laws of the links, fascinate you, please consider joining our Society of Golf Historians. Share your memories of that unforgettable Sunday afternoon in the comments below. We see you next at the first tee.